Hello and welcome to Elections on Kaya, your one-stop shop of everything you need to know in the lead up to the 29th of May when South Africa heads to the polls. We'll be doing a number of these with in-depth analysis, all kinds of perspectives. But today we decided to just start with the basics around what makes this election different, if at all. And for that, let's bring in our guest. Mamabolo is, of course, the CEO of the IEC, also joined by Wayne Sussman, an analyst around political matters, as it were. To both of you, thank you so much for popping by at Kaya. Lovely to see you.
Thank you very much, and greetings.
Thank you. Now, I'll start with just what sticks out for many people when we think about just practically what might be different in 2024. And the first thing, for me at least, is the fact that we have three ballots. There's the national ballot, a provincial ballot, and then for the first time, a regional ballot. What's the difference between the last two? Because in my mind, a province is a region.
Indeed. But let's put it this way. The elections of the National Assembly has two tiers. The first tier is a regional tier, or if you want to call it correctly, it's a province to national tier. That elects 200 of the 400 members of the National Assembly. The second tier of the election of the National Assembly, it's a PR ballot, the straight ballot that we've always used. Now, to go back to the regional ballot or province to national ballot, provinces share the 200 seats of the National Assembly based on the number of voters registered in that province. So Gauteng will probably have 44, and then the list would be the Northern Cape, perhaps with under 10 or so members of parliament to be elected on that regional ballot. Now, independent candidates, and we have about 18 of them across the 9 regional ballots, are going to be appearing on this regional ballot and also on the provincial ballots. But they're not going to be appearing on the compensatory proportional representation ballot.
In other words, the national ballot.
In other words, the national ballot.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the first difference, that previously the regional ballot was embedded in the national ballot. On this occasion, it has been disentangled from the national ballot, and it's a unique ballot of its own. It will be unique from province to province. So a regional ballot in Gauteng is not going to be the same as the regional ballot in KZN, because different parties might be contesting, different independents might be contesting, and contesting only just that one province.
Wow.
So it is, when you have Party A, it doesn't mean that Party A is going to be contesting the same regional ballots as against Party B.
Sure.
So it's going to be a unique per province.
Got you. All right. I wonder, Wayne, if we can still speak to, if I find myself inside the ballot box, what I'm expected to see. So for one, I'm meant to have 3 pieces of paper, to put plainly. Does that mean I've got 3 options, so to speak?
Yes, so this will be we sitting in the beautiful city of Johannesburg at KFM studio.
Yeah.
But if you had to be sitting in Sebokeng and voting in the local government elections, you'd be getting 3 ballots. So South Africans who live beyond metros have had elections before in the local government elections where you get 3 ballots, a ward ballot, a PR ballot, and a district ballot. So I think it won't be it'll be a new experience for many, but not for many South Africans. For many South Africans, it won't be a new experience. And it's interesting. Certainly in Gauteng in 2019, there was definitely a Ramaphosa effect where you saw the ANC well overperform on the national ballot in Gauteng compared to the provincial ballot. However, over time, you've seen that there is a much closer alignment with the provincial ballot and the national ballot. So in Gauteng in 2019 was a bit of an exception, but so what I think might well happen is that there will be a strong alignment with a relatively strong alignment with the national, provincial, and the regional to national. You will see some difference, of course, but I think when the votes are counted, and maybe I'll have to come explain myself if I'm wrong, I think there will be quite close alignment. But as Mr. Mamabolo says, this does allow South Africans to make distinctions between who they want on that national ballot. Maybe there's a name in the regional to national ballot which stands out. Maybe there's an independent candidate. There's a former world champion boxer in Limpopo who's running as an independent. There's a very famous social activist running in the Western Cape as an independent. So it could be interesting to see whether there is much variance in how people choose on election day.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we'll be able to speak a bit more about that in a moment. But as a start, as you just crunched the numbers, Sai, how many independent candidates have now been confirmed to be eligible to run for the election? And I suppose as you answer that question, you can let us in on how many parties there are, because it almost feels that this is the most contested election since we started our democracy.
Yes. Look, the processes of the commission are governed by the election timetable. And in terms of that election timetable, the provisional lists of candidates, together with the parties contesting, will be issued on the 26th. And any member of society basically can come inspect the nomination documents. And if you are aggrieved by the candidature of this or the other candidate, you'd have an opportunity to raise an objection by the 27th. But be that as it may, we've already indicated that the unique parties that have submitted some kind of nomination document stand at stands at 115 at the moment, with 18 independent candidates.
Sure, all right. Which does mean, I mean, in a society where there aren't any major objections, this was going to be a heated election. I mean, we've been saying that for a while, but now we're starting to see real, tangible signs of why that might be the case.
This is certainly going to be the most contested election in our democratic history, for a variety of reasons. One is there's a party like the Economic Freedom Fighters, where they are now a 3-election ANC breakaway success story. Whereas if you think of parties like with respect to COPE and with respect to the United Democratic Movement, they were very much reduced after the first time they ran as an election. Then you've got a new party like Umkhonto weSizwe, which is another significant ANC breakaway success story. You have something like the multi-party charter, where in all the election scenarios are presented, the least likely of them taking over South Africa after the election, but this is a significant grouping. Then you have new parties like Build One South Africa, Rise Mzansi, etc., who are also contesting. So there are so many personalities, so many parties who believe that this time will be different. And that is why I think that the ANC's backs are up against the wall in this respective election, but do not count the ANC out. They are brilliant at closing the election. There's something called the squeeze. They do this better than any other political party, and those who are attempting to write the obituary of the ANC better be very careful, because when we analyze elections, it's not just about the big cities, about Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Cape Town. We need to look at the full length and breadth of this country. And there are many pockets of this country where voters will stand by the ANC because they believe that the ANC will deliver much better than any other political party.
Sure. It's a lot to consider. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
You know, Wayne raises a very important point about the number of contestants. It's a very important factor to consider in any election. But there's also this reality that should not be lost on the voter. And that is, take the number of parties that took part in the foundational elections in 1994, about 16 parties, and about 12 of them managed to get a seat in parliament. So the relationship between the number of participants and those getting at least a seat was very high. Fast forward to 2019, you had 46 parties on the ballot, but only 14 of them managed to get a seat. So what that tells us is that, of course, there's a fracturing of the in the political system, but that fracturing does not give us a more diffused legislative assembly, or it doesn't give us a more plural legislative assembly. I don't know whether on this occasion that same trend will hold, but it's something that I think is quite interesting to note. From our perspective as an election administrator, the greater the number of participants, the more difficult it is to manage the logistics, especially the key element of an election, which is the ballot paper. We're going to be printing, I can assure you, on the national ballot, the compensatory ballot, we're going to be printing a substantially bigger ballot than we did in 2019, precisely because of the new entrants who have come onto the field. I guess it is South Africa's democracy, and we have to do it so that people are given that choice to make their mark.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I can come in there, as we speak about ballots still, there is a perception in our country that you get to vote for people, and we know that that happens in other countries, right? So in the US, it's a person because it's a presidential candidate. In our country, we speak of independent candidates, but in a lot of instances, you actually still vote for organizations. Who can people expect to see on the ballot and not to see on the ballot, if you know what I mean, right? Because as I mentioned, in many instances, depending who you ask, and I'm sure you'll weigh in on this, Wayne, it feels like there's personality politics happening in the country, and people back individuals as opposed to the organizations that those individuals are from, without mentioning any names. Okay. So what are the rules, really, from the IEC's perspective about who can and can't be on the ballot paper?
Well, the Commission has considered the matter quite carefully and has confirmed the following, that in respect of political parties, it will be the full name of the party, it will be the abbreviated name of the party, the photo of the registered leader of the party, and then the emblem or the symbol of the party, and then the block where you mark your ballot. In respect of an independent candidate, it will be the full name of the independent candidate, their photo as well, and then a thing that indicates that they are an independent and therefore they don't have a abbreviation or a logo of the party. So that's how the ballot is going to be configured. And I think it accords with international standards. In fact, there's a study that we did with the Human Sciences Research Council that tells us that the voter, when they get into the ballot booth, one of the primary factors that they consider on the ballot is the logo, more than the photo of the leader nor the name of the party, which is why we're placing the emblem of parties closest to where people mark their ballots, because it's the primary identifier which voters use to mark their ballots.
That's interesting, and I suppose that's why parties can't have emblems that are too similar, right? Because it might cause a lot of confusion. Is there a restriction about who a party can submit as their registered leader?
No, there is none. There is none. For as long as the person is qualified to be a voter, they can be a leader of a party. I think you've got to look at that in contradistinction to who can be a candidate. It's a separate consideration altogether.
Right, and I'm sure you see where I'm going with this, right? Around if anybody can be a registered leader of a party, that means pretty much anybody can have their photo on a ballot, even though they are not necessarily eligible to be part of the Legislative Assembly.
Indeed. You can be a registered leader of a party,
Right.
but that does not grant you automatic nomination to be a candidate. To be a candidate, there are certain statutory and constitutional factors that must be satisfied. Amongst those is that you must be a registered voter. You must sign an acceptance of nomination. You must accept to be bound by the Electoral Code of Conduct. And the party administrator who submits the nomination documents must declare that everybody on that list is qualified to hold membership of a legislative assembly. So, in effect, what the Commission has done, they have taken the constitutional requirements for membership of a legislative body and embodied them into the nomination requirements. So, without prejudging any issue, because the process has not as yet opened, that's really the jurisprudence that has been created on the nomination of candidates.
Okay, that clarity is important.
So I know I'm with an award-winning interviewer, but that means that you have to be living to be a candidate in this election. You cannot be deceased to have your photo on the to have your photo on the ballot.
You have to be a registered leader of a party.
So if you're deceased,
I suppose if you're deceased and you are still reflected as the leader, then you can be used as such. As long as, you see, what the Commission is trying to avoid, taking anybody in the party and say, use this photo or use the other photo. They're trying to limit it to people who are legally registered as party leaders with the Commission.
Yeah.
So in that case, I think we'll have to check whether if a person is deceased, is he still the registered leader of the party or not? That would be the factual inquiry we have to do.
Yeah, and I think what also would be a lot of interest for people is whether or not a leader of a party needs to be eligible to be in parliament ultimately, or to be a candidate for the legislature. And the sense I'm getting from you is kind of, because there are already requirements according to the Constitution, which you say are embedded in how the IEC is going to go about this.
No, certainly. It would be farcical, in fact, to have a situation where a person is a candidate, but once elected, they can't hold office. It's wasting people's time and taking people for a ride, which is why the constitutional requirements for holding membership of a legislative body are embedded, as it were, into the nomination requirements.
Fascinating. We've had a discussion without mentioning any names, which is, I think, something I will take upon my own pride, of course. But let's move on slightly. I think it's so important to speak about the voters themselves. We've got 27 million people who are eligible to vote for the first time. And I always find it fascinating to understand where they come from, who they are, generally speaking, and the likes. I'm not sure if you've got that kind of information, Wayne. But if you can speak to us generally about, what the voters' role this year might tell us about the type of election we might have.
Yeah, first of all, a credit to the IEC for their 2 registration weekends, for the fact that people could register online for the first time. But even though we've breached the 27 million mark, the percentage increase in the voters' roll between this election and the previous election is lower than any other major election. And that, the IEC did a brilliant job, in my opinion, in getting people to try and motivate people. But we have to reflect as society why the percentage increase was lower than normal. Are young people not seeing value in voting? And what's very interesting, again, is to look at where the highest percentage increase was over a 5-year period. And that was in the Western Cape and in Limpopo. Now, what's interesting about those two provinces is that Limpopo is the province where the ANC performed best in 2019. And even though turnout was actually sadly very low in Limpopo in 2019, the registration increase in Limpopo is very high between 2019 and 2024. That, for me, is a good sign for the ANC. The other thing is the second highest percentage increase was in the Western Cape. And the Western Cape, particularly between the second registration weekend and the closing of the voters' roll, there was a massive spike in online registration. And I've gone through that that data, and it seems to me that the DA, because I looked very strongly at where those areas were in the Western Cape, like pulled out all the stops. So that again just shows to you that if you've done this rodeo before, if you've fought an election before, the ANC is the best at fighting elections, and one would argue the DA is the second best at fighting elections, they're the second largest party. You can see they're focused on where their strongest supporters are. Another area where there was a strong increase was actually Gauteng, particularly towards the back end of the campaign. In that final 2 weeks, the biggest spike was in Gauteng. So these are some of the things we have to focus on. By the way, just one other point about the ANC. What's the other key province for the ANC is the Eastern Cape. If you look at the former, the OR Tambo district, which is the ANC's heartland in the Eastern Cape, places like Mthatha, the ANC did very well in the second registration weekend there. So it's one thing focusing on the 27 million number, and when Mr. Mamabolo announced it, the nation should celebrate, but we've got to break down those numbers and see where the spikes came in registration. If my memory serves me correctly, the Free State, I think, has less voters today than in 2019, slightly less, and that's concerning, because we all love the Free State. So.
Absolutely, we do. But more than that, of course, you want to legitimize the election, right?
Yeah.
And at the heart of that is to ensure that as many people participate in it as they can. How does this affect your own planning as the IEC, especially when it comes, once again, to the printing of things like ballots? I imagine it's very important to get your cue from something like a voter's roll when it comes to where you allocate your resources.
Oh, certainly. The voters' roll is an important planning tool in terms of our logistics. For the ballot paper, we're printing 100% registration at each station. So if there are 115 persons registered at the voting station, we will print 100%, bar the rounding off factor. Our ballot books are composed in multiples of 100. So every ballot book has 100 ballots in it. So a station that has 115 voters will get 2 books of 100, giving us a total of 200. So it's an important planning tool. We are also able to tell you that to manage the queue in this station, you need to apply 3 or 4 streams. In other words, don't just put one voting compartment. You need a minimum of 4 or 5 voting compartments. You need to break your voters' roll into 5 components if it's a 5 stream station. If you do that, it allows for you to service the voter much quicker. But again, those operational decisions are predicated on you analyzing your voters' roll well and planning accordingly.
Fascinating stuff. Yeah, boy?
I'm a very old-fashioned person who's scared of technology. The zip machines, what if they malfunction? What if they... could that be a bottleneck on voting day? And then just very importantly, the fact that you have to vote at the station you registered this time unless you fill out a form, which I think will make the IEC's job much easier, that they won't run out of ballot papers.
Yeah. No, when he's raising a very important point. Remember, we replaced the zip machine. It is out of operation at the moment. We're using the voter management device. Now, the voter management device is not a legislated requirement in the voting process. it is an aid. It's an administrative aid to ensure that we can process people, we can have an analysis of the stats post the election, but also we're trying to fortify our controls to ensure that there are no allegations of people voting twice or not. If, for some reason, all the voter management devices malfunction on the day, they are not required in law. What is required is that the person's name must be on the voter's roll. And we have to cross them out and so on and so on. But we don't want to reduce the controls. We want to fortify the controls. Hence, we need to ensure that the voter management device works. We have just under 40,000 of them for 23,000 voting stations. So we are able to have a buffer, and we are also able at the right stations to give more than one so that there is no bottleneck around that mission.
Is the old-fashioned person in you at ease?
More at ease, yes.
But it's an important question, and I absolutely agree with that. So you can't vote twice. We all know that, and hopefully nobody ever does. However, can you be on different ballots, given the nature of our election
Different
this year?
voting roles, different voters' roles, or different ballots.
Different. Well, I mean, here's an example. Can somebody contest at different levels, at a regional level and a provincial level, for argument's sake, right? Is something like that possible?
It is possible. Let's take the independents. An independent candidate can run on the province to national in Gauteng, in the Western Cape, and in Limpopo. In the event they win all three, let's say they manage to get a seat in all three, they'll be allocated the seat where they've won with the greatest proportion of votes. So it is possible. Similarly, some parties will put a candidate in a province as well as on the national list. If they win both, we often give them a day or two to exercise an election as to which one they're going to be taking. But to answer your question, yes, it's possible.
But they could be on all three ballots, correct? They could be on the national to national, the provincial to national, and the provincial ballot. A candidate for a party.
If you are a party candidate, it's possible, but you can only be in the region in which you are registered.
Of course.
And the province in which you are registered.
Sure.
Okay.
Right. Stay with me. That being said, you can't be on different lists, right? That's my understanding. On candidate lists, that is. We've had a situation, and I think, Wayne, you'll set me right on this, where, for argument's sake, people find themselves with allegiance to two different parties, right? And they make it to the list for both parties, seldom as that may be. Does the IEC accept that list?
Well, there's a procedure which is regulated in terms of the timetable. In the event there's a person who appears on multiple lists, or they double park, so to speak. They are on Party A and Party B. We will notify both parties of that occurrence and offer them to either confirm that candidate or replace them.
Do they have to, or is that an offer? If you know what I mean. I mean, is there expectation that you restrict them to one list, or if both parties are comfortable with that, as is the candidate, does the IEC say, okay, well, so be it?
No, it's an offer to look at the situation. It's a notification to them, basically.
Okay.
They may come back and say, no, we are happy with him being a double packer.
Has something like that ever happened, Wayne? I mean, to your knowledge?
Yes, so it's Dennis Bloom from Cope in 2009 was on both the ANC list and on the Congress of the People list, and it was ultimately his decision. He made the consequential decision to go with Cope, of which he served the national spokesperson for many years, up until I think last year.
Yeah.
And that was his decision. I think Mervyn Dirks, I haven't seen the final MK list, but he was on the list the ANC, he's in KwaZulu-Natal. He's an ANC MPL or MP, He was on the ANC list, and I'm almost certain he's going to be on the MK list, but we know that he'll choose the MK because he's resigned from the ANC.
Right.
So ultimately, it's an unfortunate situation to find oneself in, but I'm very certain that the candidate and the candidate will also has to make the decision. Political parties might allow polygamy, but they cannot allow political polygamy for too long. Okay.
Right. And they'll make of that image what they will.
Yes.
Staying with images, and I'm very aware of our time. We will have a lot of opportunity to kind of, speak about the qualitative nature of the election. But I think already there are clear signs emerging around what appears to be top of mind for people who are taking part in these polls. It is a national and provincial election, even though we have regional ballots. But it almost feels to me that there are a lot of local government issues that are dominating even just discourse around what people care about.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old adage that all politics is local. I think that's more true in this election than ever before. And by the way, local, the ministry is called Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, is a portfolio. All the parties, I saw Action SA announce their shadow cabinet already. People are voting on local government and provincial government because there are ministries involved. Water, infrastructure, there's so many things which impact local government. But I do agree with you. When one sees the ongoing news reports of some of the challenges in our major metro areas and, of course, some of our rural areas, that local issues will be more top of mind than previous elections because local issues will affect the future of the country for the next 5 years, and that's what South Africans are ultimately going to vote for in the next 5 years, of the direction of the country they want to. They want their party of choice to take the country on a local level and on an international level.
Absolutely. And it's on that note that we'll have to leave it. Thank you so much for your insights and for revealing to us new things as part of our discussion. Sam Mamabolo, Wayne Sussman, really do appreciate your speaking to us. And thank you for watching. You can catch more content around the elections this May, wherever you're listening to this podcast for Kaya News, on the streets and on the air.